We've been here for the last 4 years. My wife, Rebecca, and our 5 kids, 18 to 5. And we've been doing simple church is what we call it, in homes and storefronts for bivocationally for the last 13 years. So for the first 10 years of my professional career, I was a full-time minister, pastor in non-denominational churches, motivated by church planting, but always looking to do it slightly differently in a way that would be more organic and sustainable. And we help start churches, they call it launch large or micro church or whatever they call it. We've helped start all those different kinds of churches and transition to this way of doing church as family is what we talk about. As a family of families about 13 years ago, and initially got introduced to Luke 10 about 10 or 12 years ago, went to a session that a friend of mine hosted with John White, and remember just learning about the simplicity of church being, 2 people or more. And that was a captivating idea and led us on a long journey, and then reconnected with Luke 10 more deeply about, it's got to be 5, 6, almost 6 years ago now, when we were moving here to the Pacific Northwest to start again. And I just thought, I want to get refreshed. I want to think through what we're doing again. And the beauty is that I felt like, the relational rhythms that you guys talk about was absolutely what we needed to restart, kept us out of our heads, and kept us listening to Jesus for just the next steps, because right after we moved, we had a pandemic and lockdowns and all kinds of fun things. So we just have consistently enjoyed the journey of listening to Jesus together as we kind of figured it out. And by day, for the last 13 years, I've been in talent acquisition and development, doing recruiting, training. And now my main job right now, and we have a nonprofit that does work with families in the community called Family Rhythms, where we incorporate a lot of these things into parenting and music and things like that. And we also I do consulting, but my day job is I manage training for a group of 400 people in a wealth management company here in the Pacific Northwest. So that's why you see this beautiful view behind me, is because I'm on the 5th floor of our building looking out at the forest behind me.
Wow. That is a lot of hats.
Just a few.
Just a few. I hope we have time to touch on maybe all of them. So just incredible. Well, thank you for being with us. And as always, I just check in and listen before I do any interview, because we want Jesus to be a part of it too and lead our conversation. And sometimes when we quiet, God reminds you of things that he's like, hey, I want you to remember to say this, or I want you to remember to talk about that. So I love to just give some silence for that as well. So why don't we just quiet for 10, 15 seconds and then check in first. Sure. And then we'll listen for about a minute or so, and then we'll just jump into whatever conversation unfolds. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
All right. Big, deep breath, how we're checking in. All right. So believe it or not, I am on my 9th hour of work for today already. So
I bet.
So I am tired and excited. And I'm tired for obvious reasons. It's all good and wonderful and beautiful. I am excited to talk with you. So I'm just still pumped and I'm like going to crash at some point today. I don't know when. And I'm also excited because one of my daughters, my 3rd daughter, has graduated from 8th grade today, which I know you can appreciate. And we're having a party for her. I literally will walk out of this call with you and head straight to Hattie B's, which is Nashville's hot chicken place, her favorite place. And we will party and celebrate her on Broadway downtown, because that's where her school is. And she just can't wait to go to high school. And it's just
very cool.
Privilege to live here right now. So I think that's all of me.
Yeah.
We're excited and probably going to crash at some point from sheer physical exhaustion and emotional exhaustion from being so happy all day. I'm in.
Yeah.
What about you, Ryan?
I think I'm a mix of happy and a little bit anxious, I would say.
Hmm.
Happy in that I'm enjoying this day to think about Luke 10 and what I've learned from you guys, and how that's helping us. Even literally right before this call, I was on we have what would be kind of like a teaching circle essentially for our network of churches. And so we were just talking about the life in our communities. We've got all kinds of kids, and how are we managing conflict around how the kids are behaving, and what are we teaching this next Sunday? And there's good tension there. So I'm anxious about some of that tension. But I'm grateful for the rhythms that we have to like really listen deeply to each other, and to have hard conversations. Someone saying like, hey, next time, can you not talk to my kid that way, and have me parent them? And just good, hearty, frank conversation. So just anxious to tend to those things, but happy to have rhythms and skills that have really proved useful for a long time.
Wow, you are in the thick of it for sure.
Yep.
And a lot of Luke tenors, work as coaches or counselors, and
Yep.
so they're not overseeing whole communities like that. And there's a few of you out there, right, that are running church planting networks or institutional churches, and or intentional communities like Dr. Kent Smith. And you guys, you really live in the thick of it with when you get more than one family gathered, right? More than one family, and they're being community together. Holy camole. Yes. So your experience is a huge wealth for everyone listening to this recording or to it live whenever they listen. Really, Ryan, you have been a trailblazer, and it's just an honor to be able to kind of glean from some of that today. So thank you for giving your time with all the hats that you're wearing. All right. So why don't we take, is 1 minute or 2 minutes? 2 minutes to listen. Does that sound good?
One is good. I listened before, so
you did.
I'll just check in on the list.
All right, sounds good. So we'll do 1 minute of listening, and we'll be back, everyone.
Right.
So if you're out there listening and you don't like silence, lean into it and think, God, what do you want me to know about this time right now? And do you have any questions for Ryan after listening to a little bit of his intro? Any questions you might have? I'll try to keep an eye on the questions during our interview just in case, or we'll look at them at the end. But yeah, any questions you might have, throw them up there. Listen while we're listening. I'll be right back in a minute. All right. During my listening time, I already had a list too that I had listened on beforehand of things that I'd love to hear about if possible. But when I quieted, really what was coming to my mind was a time you and I spent together. I don't know how long ago now, probably a few years. I don't know.
Yep.
And if I recall correctly, we were discussing divine governance, decision making.
It's on my list.
Oh, good. Because I just finished a session with Dr. Kent Smith, and his unique contribution, which is divine governance. And that's going to be a podcast as well for Joy-Filled and Jesus Led. And who knows, I might follow it up with this one if possible. But I just remember that being an important moment in your church planting network. And so I would love to hear a little about that. But I don't want you to lead with that necessarily. I'd love to hear what you heard when you were listening and go with what you sensed Jesus leading you to talk about.
Yeah, that's definitely on my list. It's third on my list though. So we'll
awesome.
get there.
As long as we get there.
I think the first thing that I mentioned at the beginning was the first thing that I heard, that my introduction to Luke 10 was just a reminder of how simple it is to follow Jesus together. And so we didn't pick up the CO2 language right away. We started to call it mutual discipleship, where we're both disciples of Jesus together. So there's not a discipler and a disciplee, but we're mutually walking with Jesus together. And I think, to build to divine governance, I think you guys even mentioned this a little bit that I got to hear you talk to Kent, was, the rhythms that you build there in everyday mutual discipleship really are the same rhythms that we use at every level of leadership, counseling, shepherding, teaching, conflict resolution. Those are the rhythms that we're honest about how we feel. We're listening to Jesus for what he wants us to notice. And then we're asking him to, be the Lord of the harvest and be the one who will provide what's needed for the work that's in front of us. And so to me, that is foundational. And it's, I really can't overemphasize like how cultivating those simple rhythms with people in a church family has radically transformed how we literally do everything. I mean, we have our teaching circle right before this. We don't call it that. It's just the three of us that are involved with stewarding the teaching, but it's basically a teaching circle. And we just checked in with like, how did our gatherings go yesterday? And how are we doing in light of that? And stuff came up about parenting and how the kids are behaving. And then we're able to just share, in a round. And so those rhythms of checking in really shape everything that we do. And it's very freeing. So
Ryan,
that's kind of the first thought.
Thank you. Can I ask you, a lot of people do Luke 10 training, and then when they move into their business or their church, they apply it in their small group setting as a great tool to use for their small group setting, which it is, right?
Yeah.
But as you know, Luke 10 says it needs to be the mutual discipleship daily, right? It needs to be a church of daily, because just once a week isn't enough to grow the skills we need to grow, right? Yep. How has that been received in your community, the daily mutual discipleship? I love that y'all are calling it that. Are people doing it? Do you find that it's a great idea, but they don't really practice it? Or are you like, no, man, they're on it. They're doing it.
We have a core group that are really doing it. And it is really fun when people catch it. I will tell you that, it's taken years. I mean, we've been doing this for 13 years. So the fruit that we have is not from, some quick kind of thing. But I would say, honestly, the challenges of the pandemic really forced people to look at how am I going to live my life, because their systems and communities and whatever were broken and weren't working. And so the idea of listening to Jesus as a response to the complete unknown or the completely different, that was really shaping for us to get more. Now the majority of people are doing it. So we actually, I mean, honestly, we've doubled in size in our group in the last 3 months. So we're like around 50 people right now, which is bigger than we usually are. But our core group of maybe 27 or so, the majority of the adults were checking in with each other, whether as spouses or as friends. And I would say, the biggest hurdle that this has really opened is just how hard it is for spouses to check in with each other. And so that continues to be the momentum we have, the language that we have is that people are checking in. They wonder how to do it. It's risky. It's hard to make time for. And the biggest hurdle is, are they doing it with their spouse? That's kind of the big thing we still are working on.
Yeah. I mean, people laugh and they're shocked, but I'll say, I can know how well your marriage is doing in 5 minutes. Do you have 5 minutes? And watching how they check in, how safe they feel together, how they go or don't. Like, you can tell everything about a marriage in basically 5 minutes with how two people check in with each other. And you're right. It's the hardest person to check in with, honestly, because, usually because there's so many years of pain built up and distrust built up and hurt built up, that then you have to kind of peel away and create safe space. And it's just a lot harder. So I totally respect that. You might laugh, but John White's principal role right now in Luke 10 is to shepherd marriages of our leaders.
Cool.
Because he's really gifted at it. He does an incredible job coaching couples in particular. And all of us have needed it at one point or another, because marriage is not easy at all, as you know. So very very worthwhile effort, but not easy at all. It takes years sometimes. I also love that you pointed out that implementing this in any setting is going to take time. And I think that a lot of our people get sad, frustrated, discouraged that the depth of their leader team isn't happening locally. So how have you balanced that out or mentalized it for yourself to be in it for this long of a haul? I mean, obviously you have pastoral strengths, not necessarily some of the other crazy prophetic people out there that want to be moving all the time, but you definitely have some of that probably as a on the APES. But what else has helped you stick with this for the long haul and not get impatient?
I mean, probably primarily my own experience with it. I mean, that was the kind of the second thing on my list, is just the healing power of appreciation in my own journey. I think, we've gone through some really hard things. When you're trying to be on mission with people, you don't always see eye to eye. You have disagreements, you have betrayals. And so I think for myself, probably at year maybe 6 or 7 was when we experienced a lot of betrayal, both personally in the business I was running with a partner, with the larger network of elders we were working with. And it was just a very painful experience. And I started to be cynical and anticipate problems rather than anticipating healing or joy or any of those things. And so that was kind of the fun, side thing that I didn't anticipate, is that when I got reconnected with Luke 10, the healing process of being appreciative on a regular basis just increases your capacity to endure hard things. And when you're consistently practicing that, the way that it has changed the language of my family and the conversations that we have around the dinner table, the way that we can pull that into our community. Appreciation is appreciation is the secret sauce. Although I'll tell you, people that, join the community, they're like, you guys really do this appreciation thing, seriously. And it's yeah, we do. And so that is a vital part of just remembering that God is with us, that he is tender towards us, and that he loves us. And that gives you a lot of patience, because you realize how patient God is with you. And so it's more readily extended to others as they wait and listen.
That's beautiful. Ryan, tell me if you need to move on to a different point, but I'm going to just keep getting curious.
Feel free.
So we talked about doing Church of Two or mutual discipleship, as you call it, with a CO2, right? With a partner. What about your families? Have they
Yeah.
caught the vision that I can be church every day with my children at home around the dinner table? Like, is that something that's being caught and practiced, do you think?
I think I think the short answer is yes, and I think we could always be doing better, right? So I think we appreciation was something that was really like fairly easy for families to pick up, and so some of them call it good news,
Hmm,
some of it call it thanks, but that's what they practiced around their dinner table.
beautiful.
And so it's really, I mean, it is really fun. We have kids, we have a lot of preschoolers right now, and like 4-year old age, and they will do appreciations with like around we have church around a table. So
Hmm,
right now it's a 50-person table, and they will do
fun.
appreciations around the table, and they will chime in. And we do another practice we started this year that we learned from another Luke tenor, which is to do appreciations on someone's birthday week, where we just say, what do we appreciate about that person for their birthday? And I'm telling you, the kids, like 3, 5,
Hmm,
8, 10, like their appreciations are awesome. So
wow.
it is really fun, and it is healing as adults to
Hmm,
like see how easily kids can be appreciative and come up with good news and the simple things that they like and the profound things that they like. So that's been fantastic. Really fun. And we've just been continually teaching our families how to have conversations and prayer and listening around the dinner table.
hmm,
So we've done practices around like Advent and Lent, as where
beautiful.
for that those seasons we just pause as a church,
Hmm,
and all we do is practice having a family conversation around the story of God and like what He's done in the world in the past, and how do we talk about that as families. And so we use godly play, which we learned from you as well, to make it more robust. And so we just do
hmm,
we tell the story together, and then we let the families break off and they
hmm.
do an art project. And as a family, they do like an art, like what do you want to draw from the story that you heard, or what other story did that make you think of that you want to remember. And so we've just been trying to cultivate teaching families to have these ordinary conversations. Um,
Hmm.
and so, yeah, I think there's a core, maybe 4 or 5 families that are pretty solid at how they do appreciation, how they have conversations around the
Hmm.
scripture together, how they pray together. I mean, it's really fun to watch, and it's something that they didn't know how to do, 3 years ago, and we've been teaching them how to do over the last few years.
Wow. And do you think that they're catching that church is heart to heart connection with each other and with God? And whenever we're doing that, that's church, or is church still defined as teaching, preaching, worship, gather
Oh,
others? Like, what's that cultural definition in their minds looking like?
yeah, I think for us, it's probably more the definition that church is extended family.
Hmm.
That we
Wow.
are a family of God, and we're part of a family of families. And so church in our sense is the extended family of God. Um,
Wow.
but but we are all disciples of Jesus together. So it's a little bit nuanced to what you're talking about, but
Mm,
we learn how to be the church by being a family of God first, because that's just what we do when we come together as a big group. So
wow.
we're not doing anything different than what you already are doing around the table, ideally,
Incredible. Incredible.
already.
Incredible. So talk to me a little bit about I mean some of the things, and you might have these on your list, what's worked best, what has not worked at all. I would love to hear what are your biggest challenges,
Yeah,
what have been the biggest blessings. So any of that
sure.
variety, however you want to share that.
I mean, I think for me, my journey has been giving up on what I know and just doing what Jesus says to do next. So what doesn't work is doing what I know. And what does work is leaning into whatever Jesus is doing next. So
Give an
those things are,
example of that.
oh, do I want to be,
Please.
um, yeah, there's plenty. I mean, I guess, I mean, part of it would be even what's happening now in our church, where we're in this season of God like adding to our number. And so we're like, what do we do? Like we're super big, we don't fit in a house anymore. So how are we going to gather? What does this look like for us to mature and multiply? And in my head, I have tons of church planting training. Like I've gone to all the conferences. I'm like certified as a church planter in a denomination. Like I know the leadership development pathways and the, models to duplicate. Like I know all of those things, right? That's 20 plus years of training and conferences and all of that. And to just say, I know what it looks like to be faithful. And I know that all I can do is what Jesus says to do next. So what is the next thing that he has for us? And so that has us doing uncomfortable things that like we haven't, we have these things coming together where we have a nonprofit that's taking off during the week, that's serving over 100 families on a regular basis. We have this church that's growing. And so we're looking into a mixed use facility so that we can figure out, we're not going to try to do like big church, like an auditorium, but having a mixed use facility where we can help, be an incubator for spiritual parents like you guys talk about, and have a place where we can gather to do our circles locally. But then also be servicing the community with our businesses. And our people all tend to be fairly entrepreneurial. I think I might be one of the only two people right now that's like, quote unquote, working for someone else. I think the rest of us have our own businesses in our own way, whether they're a therapist or a recruiter or a musician or elementary educator. They all tend to have their own business. So it is fairly entrepreneurial. I always talk about that we're kind of a rogues gallery. We're all post-Christians pretty much as well.
A band of apostles, it sounds like.
maybe, yeah. And a couple first generation believers, but primarily post-Christians who had been, done with church for, 10 plus years or more, and maybe weren't even accepting the label of Christian anymore. And through a process of getting reconnected with people, have, begun to fall in love with Jesus more again. So those are the best stories. My birthday was a few weeks ago and they did an appreciation round, which is, as a leader, it's hard to have that focus on you for so long. But one of the new ladies in the church was saying, you've like taught me to start falling in love with Jesus again. And what else do we want to hear? I mean, that's what we want to hear.
That is incredible. So anything else as far as biggest challenges trying to implement this in a church planting setting? I love what you said. Yeah, giving up on what I know. Maybe that was the biggest.
That is the biggest challenge. I mean, any other practical thing that you would think of, like, what do you do with the kids? How do you do music? How do you do, leadership? All these questions. Like, we all have models, we all have training, we all know what the scripture says, but learning to implement them in a relational way that fits what God is doing in your context is very freeing. But it's also for me, who's I'm a 1 on the Enneagram, so I want to do it right, and I want to do it the best way possible. That is a risky, challenging thing to do. So
wow. I love that you're bringing this out and that camping out on it, even because, just meeting with Dr. Smith, and he is so adamant. We all are very adamant about Luke 10 is not a model. We're not giving you a model for church planting at all. We're giving you a process of connection that will lead you into the presence of God as a community that will then he'll tell you what to do. He'll give you the model, because the model's different for every setting, every system, every people, every time. Right. So, so I just hear you really leaning into that truth and how hard that is. And I just really appreciate that.
And I'm on my, I think probably third or fourth iteration of church planning.
Mm.
I was part of a church that, like I said, was launching large and doing micro church or organic church, I think is what we called it back then.
Yeah.
And then having been part of this, simple church network that we've called it for the last 13 years, we've had churches that meet in storefronts, just in homes. We've had all kinds of different opportunities. So it has been different. And I love the relational center of it, that like, I can look back on it and say, no, that's all the same thing, even though the trappings or the forms are different. And so that's fun to see. And it's fun to realize, well, we're just trying to do the same thing we've been doing for a long time, but God is doing it differently now here. So that is fun.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And it almost, I feel like it takes a level of maturity to live into this relational way. And I almost feel like when we're younger, we need models or training wheels because we really don't have the relationship with God forged yet where we can. I mean, some people might, but none of us did because we didn't even know it was possible, most of us.
Yeah.
We didn't know how to listen with each other for sure. So we almost had to rely on those models. But thankfully, as God's been maturing his body in this time, he's allowing us the ability to connect with each other and him in a different way, in a way that was a very New Testament way, but newer to us. Incredible. Biggest blessings, biggest results that you've seen that you're like, wow, this has been worth the pain and the patience and the waiting and the giving up on my own model. Like, this is it, hands down. It's worth it because of.
I would say, so far, not losing my own soul is probably the most important part. I think having a new way to live with God through the different things that happen in life, the different pains or disappointments or, just unexpected troubles. I think it was fun. It was fun on last Monday, I had lunch with a guy that's new to the church. And he was talking about, he was kind of he's probably the first in the new wave of people that have joined the church. And so they joined when we were about, 27 people. And he's like, this is this great small community. We've now doubled in size. He's very anxious about what's going to happen. And he's like, he's trying to figure it out in his brain. Like, do we multiply? Do we split? I don't see any natural like split geographically. I mean, he's just thinking all the different strategic ways you might think about it, And I was like, I don't know the answer.
So painful.
It is super painful. And I was like, I don't know the answer. I've seen it happen multiple different ways. I'm just asking Jesus about what do we do this Sunday? How do we care for people where we are right now? And to the calm that I can have about being able to endure hardship or the uncertainty is super helpful. And honestly, like having a new framework to relationally work through with Jesus, like my deep wounds and entrenched sinful behaviors, that like, you get older and you start to realize like it's the same three things. Like I'm working on the same 2 or 3 things, and that can be mind numbing to bang your head against the wall about, but just to be able to relationally hear from Jesus in the way that he understands where we're at, and to receive like, this is what I give you today. There's times when managing my work and church and my family that I don't know what to do. And he literally gives me like, here's 2 or 3 things to do today. And like, I'm like, okay, I'm going to not worry about everything else. And I'm just going to get these 2 or 3 things done. And sometimes they're super mundane, like do the Amazon returns or make sure you get that email out to your boss. They're not glamorous, but there's a way that I can lie down in peace at night, knowing that, okay, I did what the Lord said. And it feels like you're actually doing the, like, serve your earthly master as you serve me. Like I am serving you. This is what I'm doing, So that is invaluable.
Ryan, thinking of that comment, I'm just going to restate it because it's so powerful. Not losing my own soul.
Yes.
I mean, that's profound. It's incredibly profound because so many have had nervous breakdowns, so many ministers, missionaries, leaders of churches, they've either had their own nervous breakdowns or they've caused a lot of nervous breakdowns.
Yes.
And I know, it doesn't escape me that we're about the same age. It doesn't escape me that you have been in the States, whereas I was overseas during the whole rise and fall of Mars Hill and that whole thing. And you're actually out west, close to where it happened, right? Were you at all involved in any of those movements? Were you watching it? Like, what was your experience during those years with church planting? Because I honestly, when I heard about it, I heard about it through the podcast, like, I don't know, a year ago, right? And because we were out of the country when all that happened. But Matt and I, we were literally the same age as all of those church planters. And had we stayed in the States, we would have been one of them. But God, thank God in his grace, sent us to Uruguay, where we beat our head against a wall for 18 years instead of had major success with millions coming, right? So, so thankfully we had our own nervous breakdowns in many different other ways, but it wasn't a success, right? So can you tell me just a little bit about it? Maybe you had no experience with them at all and didn't even know what was happening, but what was that like?
I mean, well, it's funny that on one level, it makes sense that you mention it. One of our elders in California actually was a part of Mars Hill at the beginning, early on, and was done with church as a result of that early Bible study. So not even any of the stuff that like later is like on the podcast at all.
Wow.
And his journey back to faith and back to church was one that took a long time. And I met him in 2010, and he'd been on the journey for a few years in a small church that my mentor was a part of. And it was probably another 6 or 7 years before he was willing to like actually like say like, no, I'll shepherd and care for people again, and so we've been touched by that. Obviously being a part of church planting networks, when people burn out or implode, or the kind of shortcuts that different people take, whether it's with finances or other things, those things we've all navigated. And I think that that's part of why this family approach for us has been so helpful, is that I just know that there are certain paradigms of leadership or certain paradigms of growth that is just not who I am and is not who God is asking me to be. And that gives me patience. It doesn't mean we didn't run into that ourselves. I've alluded to elders betraying us or conflict, and we've started more churches and are a part of the network today for good, where we're helping people get started and they go out and do their own thing. We don't need them to be a part of what we're doing. And we've had people that were with us for 10, 12 years that then finally said, we disagree with you about this. And so we can't even talk to you anymore. That's what we talked about divine governance about, was we'd hit a wall with one of our churches and we're just unable to talk well about what even the problem was. And so divine governance, just the idea of listening to each other and listening to Jesus was so helpful in parting well when, reconciliation wasn't something that the other people wanted to do. And honestly, to feel the freedom of that, to realize that Jesus was just offering us a peaceable parting, even without reconciliation. I don't think that my, Enneagram 1 mind could have even comprehended that kind of thing. Like, we're either going to reconcile or it's wrong, and there's just a better relational way to just admit, hey, you don't want to talk with us about this, and this is important enough that we need to go our own ways, but we don't have to be angry at each other, or it doesn't have to be wrong. So we've had that stuff that we've had to deal with even within doing church as family. We just have a different relational way to do it that I feel like is guards us a little bit from. It helps us focus on the relationship rather than the other trappings of like, is this thing successful? Is it not? Are you living up to your job description? I mean, all those things that you get into when you're an organization, which I do every day because I'm in talent acquisition and development. So that's what I do. I'm in HR, but I don't have to do HR speak in the church. We can just be a family, and we can reconcile or be peaceable with each other, and part ways when we need to, if that's what the Lord leads us to. So,
Wow. So we're going to hit time in a little bit, but I want to make sure you were able to talk about everything on your list before I keep prying, because I could pry for hours.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think being sure to talk about how helpful divine governance can be for conflict resolution, I think is super helpful. So if people are trying to figure out, how do we partner with each other? How do I lead a core team when I'm planting a church? I think divine governance is a great solution. But it begins with those basic rhythms of listening to our hearts and listening to Jesus' heart, because if you aren't able to do those relational skills, you won't be able to do divine governance. So I just think it's a great tool for people to lean into, especially if they're going to be, leading a circle of leaders or trying to lead a mission on a certain direction that you're going. So highly recommend
I love that
going through it from basics to the total.
The way you say that, Ryan, because so many people, they'll come to us and they'll be like, well, I don't really want to do church 101 and all that stuff. I just want to learn how to govern, or I want to learn how to church plant, or I want to learn how, and we're like, well, we actually think you need to start with church 101.
Yep.
So what I hear you saying is, that's actually helpful, because you're not going to be able to implement whatever we suggest unless you already have these rhythms down, and most likely people don't.
Well, and to really lean into, I remember kind of the first, maybe the second, I think it was actually probably in training to be a Church 101 facilitator, that I think you leaned into me about hey, you're doing this with the other guys in your church network, but you're not doing this with your wife. How about you do that? You said it in a much nicer way, because in a much more relational way, but it was an invitation. Why don't you consider this? Again, as an Enneagram 1, I heard it as right and wrong, but it was a great gift. It was a great invitation, a great reminder of what's most important. And it really is, if you can't do it with those most intimate relationships, you're not going to have intimate, attached bonds with other leaders to really lead through hard things together. So that really is the right, those are the right relationships to start with. And if you don't have it there, you probably, in my opinion, you shouldn't be leading a team of leaders, because you can't do it in that basic unit, which is, as a Bible guy, that's what Paul says, manage your household well. So it starts there. And I've had to restart multiple times in ministry, in whatever way the season allowed, to focus on being a good husband, being a good parent, and making sure that foundation is laid, because it really will help you get through all the other stuff.
It's beautiful. And I just want to say, if people are out there listening to this and they're like, there's no way that's happening with my spouse, because, they have a personality disorder, or maybe it's not even that extreme, but, maybe you have a personality disorder. But we have coaches in Luke 10 who are highly gifted and highly trained to really help couples, accompany them through growing these skills. And even if a spouse isn't willing to do that, we have coaches that can help the one who is willing to learn and grow, continue their development, even though, right? So, we're very sensitive to that dynamic, because it is really hard. It's really hard. And I think, because it makes sense that it's really hard. I mean, our marriages represent the image of God. And so why would they not be under attack all the time? And it's just really hard to bond healthily to each other.
Yeah. And
most of us don't know how.
I would just affirm that is the case. I mean, I think when you were saying that to me, that was probably 14 years into our marriage. So that gives you a context for where I was at. And we've had guys who want to lead in the church that have spent 7 years or more patiently waiting, being a servant to their family and to their wife, because they just weren't ready for for a lot of the reasons you're talking about, there were probably, maybe diagnosable or significant areas of trauma that needed to be healed before you could even get there. And so that patience, I would say, pays off, and it's worth it. It's definitely worth taking the time. So we're talking about having done this over, like I said, 13 years, 7+ years, long periods of time to wait patiently and not do the things we know to do, because we know that we need to have that right foundation in our initial spheres of influence and relationships and families.
Something that you're saying, I think is so important. And when we talk about implementation and local people developing local expressions, right? This is something we're hitting constantly. And that is that when you go local, you really grow at the speed of attachment. And you're usually developing relationships with people who do not have healthy attachment at all.
Yes.
So it is going to be a 13-year or more. For
Yep.
us in Uruguay, it was 18 years of developing healthy family bonds with each other, learning how to do conflict well, learning how to, parent each other's children well or not, learning how to respect each other, differentiate, link together. Like, it is a lifelong endeavor.
Yes.
And the difference for us, when I was in Uruguay, I was like, it took me 18 years to build this with 30 people or 50 people, right? It's like,
Yep.
I can't start a church planting movement this way, right? But then you realize, oh, well, I can train others like me, other houses of peace, so they can go do this for 13 years where they are. That's the movement piece. And that's where Luke 10 really helped me be able to go, so I get to dedicate my life to my community here, and I can be a part of training a movement, a global movement. But I'm not looking at my little house church as the global movement. And I think that's radically different than the way I was trained in church planting. I was trained to build this in my house and then multiply it and then multiply it and then multiply it and train these leaders because they were going to be the ones to go out. And I'm kind of like, in Uruguay, at least, they weren't the ones that were going to go out. They were the ones we were parenting or reparenting, forming healthy bonds with, and that would take 20 years. But Luke 10's bringing leaders that are ready to do this everywhere. So with just training together, we get to encourage each other and see the movement grow and pay attention to our own communities as they develop. It's radical rethinking.
Moving at the speed of attachment was a really helpful phrase that I probably only heard for the first time a couple years ago, but I was like, oh, that's what we're doing. That is what it is. And I was appreciative that my mentor, and who's kind of part of our core leadership team of the network, said early on in 2010, Ryan, you got to stop thinking in months and you got to start thinking in years. Because most church planting plans will have you think what's your 1-year goal? What's your 3-year goal? What's your 5-year goal? And he is like, that's thinking in months, and you need to start thinking in decades. Who are you going to be when you're 40? Who are you going to be when you're 50? What will these people be like when you're 40, when you're 50? And that shift in thinking is what even made me open to the idea of okay, what am I doing here? Who will I be in 10 years? Who will I be in 20 years? And that's where these relational skills are really fun and exciting, because I can see being a more healthy, whole person in 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. Super exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great.
And then when you think of all of us being more mature in 10 years, I can't wait.
Yeah.
If we're having this conversation in 10 years, I wonder what we're going to talk about, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Can't wait to do it. Well, thank you so much for letting us pick your brain today. I can only imagine after hearing this interview, several are going to be like, can I move out to where he is and be a part of this? It sounds wonderful. Everyone is longing for something like this locally. What I'd love to do is take a minute to listen, mainly for the people who might be live out there, because you and I listened on this morning already, but Luke 10's only able to develop our resources and coordinate global training and continue experimenting with church as secure attachment because of generous donors. and monthly donors as well. We're trying this at the end of the year. We'll do, one-time campaign and ask people to give one-time gifts. But this is the time of the year where we kind of focus on monthly donations. Would anyone love to become a monthly donor? Our goal this year, I don't think we've said so far today, is to get 3,000 more in monthly donations. We're actually like 8,000 short every single month. And it's been taken care of usually by end of the year gifts at the end of the year, but we'd love to shorten that at least a little bit. So 3,000 more a month would help drastically reduce that $8,000 that we're short every month. So anyway, that's what we're going for in the next 4 days, and praying in and asking God to move in people's hearts. So I just want to give like a minute, 30 seconds to a minute for our listeners to just listen around. God, do you want me to be a part of this revolution, of this movement in particular that's helping train global leaders, church planters, people in nonprofits, moms and dads everywhere to take a cultural shift towards more healthy attachment in the church and beyond? Can we take just a minute to listen, and then we'll come back and do our closing, and we can listen on our closing too. What do we take away from our time together today? What was most important in our conversation? Well, I immediately thought of so much we did not get to talk about that I'm like, oh man, there's so much more to talk about. And at the same time, not losing my own soul just kept coming back to me. I take that away as well. The books that I write or the training I develop, the amount of people that might come through Luke 10 or that are here, or like, none of that matters to me. I mean, it does because I give my life to it. So it obviously matters. I mean, I'm here 8 hours a day, at least, trying to make it happen. Right. But it's meaningless if I lose my husband, if I lose myself, if I lose my children. Like, for me personally, I'm an intimate on the Enneagram, and my personal relationships are the most important thing to me. And so, yeah, I just go, wow, if all that happened and I lost my relationship with John White, my relationship with Kent Smith, my relationship with my family, and myself in the process of building something or making an impact in the world, then it would be meaningless to me. It would be like sand just blowing in the wind, So that hit me and is very meaningful for me too, Ryan, that, yeah, I think Luke 10 has kept me from losing my soul and losing all the people I love in the process, because I'm so driven that I would drive everyone away from me. Probably I would have driven everyone away from me. So I'm so deeply thankful for the rhythms of Luke 10 and the values that reorient me constantly and keep me surrounded by the people I love deeply. Anyway, that's my takeaway. What about you?
I had one that I heard listening before, and one just in listening to you there. First, I just was reminded that, I came from a conversation about parenting and our kids in our gatherings, and just a simple reminder that, hey, make sure people listen to Jesus this week about it. So just that simple, practical, oh yeah, that's my next thing. I just need to make sure that people listen, which is super helpful. And it feels like I love that I don't have to have the answer. I can just invite all the parents to listen, and we'll see what they say, It's great.
So good. If I can, since I was your trainer, checking in is so important too, because so often we want a solution because we're fear-based. We're scared we're going to mess our kids up if we
Mm,
don't do it right. We're scared they're not going to follow Jesus. We're scared. So that checking in heart to heart is crucial, because usually instead of telling us what to do with our kids, Jesus wants to heal or lead us out of fear and back to joy. Because a lot of
yep.
times it's the stance with our children that we're in more so than what we do with them that matters. And that's just my own personal experience, that I share that out of that with Matt and I,
Yeah.
our kids, and what to do with them. When the fear's gone, the creativity abounds. I mean, it's like a playground. Just go, God says, go play, go do whatever you want to do. But when we're
Yep.
bound by that fear, oh, it can get really painful when we try to listen.
The last thing I was thinking about as you were talking about losing the people that are most important to you, I love that I haven't lost those people. And I also love that the people I have lost who are dear to me, because we did ministry together for various lengths of time, the relational skills that I've learned have helped me know what it really means to forgive people, so that I don't feel like I've actually lost those relationships. They're not restored to me. I don't have them today. And so I grieve that they're lost in that way. But I realize that in my heart, I'm open. And though really painful things happened, really, really painful things happened, and they said terrible things about me, I would largely be able to open the door to them to see them tomorrow or this afternoon. Like it wouldn't be hard. And so I love that even though I don't have that relationship in the same way, they don't feel totally lost, which is a real gift to know what it means to forgive and to stay open for that kind of reconciliation.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So good to see you and be able to talk to you.
My pleasure.
I look forward to our next talk, whenever that might be.
Yep.
Hopefully it's not yours.
Nope. We're here. We're here. Cool.
Take care. Thank you so much. Thanks
so much.
I think there's another lineup right after this with Colleen Caskey and InterVarsity and how she's applied this and implemented it there. Take care.